agree 100%.
Maybe that's a deliberate strategy in the way this has been constructed.
Rod, the cynicism is
cynical.
dripping off you today. Dripping off you. Just like
So
the sweat in the
cynical,
south of France. They're actually talking about splitting the visa fee. So you pay a little bit up front for the application process, and then when it's granted, you actually complete the full payment. So it takes some of the risk, I think, out of applying for Australia, but back ends it with a guaranteed payment.
Yeah, when I read through this, I was just like, this is disgusting. Because it's one thing to set the goalposts and say, okay, we're going to lower the bar, we're going to raise the bar, we're going to do whatever. But to give yourself then the right to move the goalposts whenever you want, for whatever reason you want, that's just that's messed up, mate. That's un-Australian. G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm Rob Mullicky, coming to you today from somewhere a little bit unusual. I'm in Basque country in the southwest of France.
And g'day, I'm Dirk, founder and CEO of the Koala News, and I'm coming to you from the not so glamorous western part of Sydney on Dirk country. Mate, the south of France. That sounds pretty fancy.
It's not too bad, mate. I must admit, we've been going through a bit of a heat wave here. I'm over spending a bit of time with the in-laws, summer time, but yeah, it has been hot. Yesterday was 40. Not unheard of in Sydney as well, particularly out your way,
Yeah.
but the country's not set up for it. You know, there's no aircon anywhere, and yeah, a little bit of a shock to the system, I must admit.
No, absolutely. It's mate, it's a nice sauna for you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you guys have been freezing back home.
Exactly.
We've got a lot to talk about this week, Dirk, and as I was reading through the run, mate, my reaction was, I'm really pissed this week. I'm really annoyed.
Mate, you know, you're probably not the only one. I think it's been a really big week and a half for international education. In Australia, there's been a number of drops of information and, you know, maybe not as coordinated or as well thought out as what people were expecting. So given the fact that you were just reading the run sheet and you're pissed, you can imagine how people felt here this time last week when some of these announcements were made.
Oh yeah, and I did read the story when it first dropped. But we've got so much to get into. So let's jump into, like, what are we going to be going through, Dirk? Because there's a lot to talk about this week.
Mate, date stamp, we're recording on Tuesday the 7th of July. This is for a release on, I think it's Friday the 10th. Petrol prices, I think we're going up.
We're back to normal.
I saw 169 again the other day, so I think things are getting back up there. But yeah.
So does that mean, Dirk, we're officially dropping our petrol price check-ins at the start of our podcast?
Well, I think we said we were going to do that last week, but I just couldn't help but throw it in. I do know that half the rebates either come off or coming off shortly. We can expect to see things move up a little bit. But yeah, things are good. Mate, we can date stamp it by talking about Trump overnight and the US soccer team, but maybe we won't go into that because that'll bite up a bit of our time. But mate, yeah, look, today we're going to run through the visa hike. So on the 1st of July, visa prices went up yet again. We'll probably have a bit of a chat about how the sector reacted to that. I think that's really important. That was a kind of a unique point, I think, over the last little bit where we've seen people come together. The new national planning level has been announced, so we'll have a chat about that. We'll talk a little bit about the Universities Accord Bill, setting out ATEC's International Student Allocation Framework for next year, so for 2027. And then we shall talk a little bit about Victoria and some of their changes to rental laws and how that might affect student accommodation. And we'll finish up hopefully on a nice note by talking a little bit about the 2026 Keystone Awards.
Nice. So yeah, the big news, of course, this week, landing or in the last fortnight, dropping on top of the sector out of the blue, massive hikes in the cost of visas. Student visas basically jumping from $2,000 to $2,500. LE costs, inverted commas, only jumping $50 to $2,050, and non-award also only jumping $50, and then a couple of other categories, and then another big hike in the graduate 485 visa from $4,600 to $5,700. Mate, what was your reaction when this sort of first landed on your desk?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't heard anything. So I think that was kind of the weird thing. And then I had an agent contact me and said, what are you hearing about visa fees going up? And I'm like, nothing. What are you hearing? It was very, very strange. And it was literally the day before. And so I wrote back and I said, mate, honestly, I haven't heard much. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's going, this doesn't seem to be any intel at all. And this gentleman kept coming at me going, no, but an incremental rise. And I'm like, mate, honestly, I've got nothing. And then I woke up the morning of the 1st of July, and sure enough, my phone started blowing up saying, visa fees have gone up. And I'm just like, where has this come from? So to run through it, I think there's probably maybe four kind of main elements to this. So the first is obviously just the rate hike itself, as you said, for the main student subclass 500 going up from 2,000 to 2,500.
25%. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and mate, that's the key number. So I think right across the board, the government's put up visas by 25%. And so interestingly enough, the non-award and the ELICOS visa only went up 50. I've heard through sources that the Assistant Minister seems to think that he got a bit of a discount on that. And I believe the Foreign Minister may have assisted with that. So it's interesting, that it's gone up. The big one, I think, from an international education perspective and a student visa perspective, I don't think anyone probably thinks that we should be excluded from general visa charge increases, whether you agree with 25% or not. But on the back of what has been a really steep rise in student visa fees over the last 18 months to 2 years anyway, I did some calculations. Over the last 2 years, the student subclass 500 visa has gone up 252%. So that's, it's a very, very sharp rise. So on the back of that, there probably is a rationale for, student visas to have been excluded from, any visa hikes that may have gone on, more generally. So that's probably the first point. The second point is a lot of people mentioned that there was just no consultation. So like me, many were in the dark around, this coming through, and so it turns out that it's not a bill, but apparently the bit of legislation or the script that needs to go through went through literally the night before it went up. So now, A, is that good practice? No. B, should people have been aware? Probably. C, this is the one that gets me. I spoke to a few people in the know, and a few people who had been in Canberra literally in days previous who had been in front of ministers, assistant ministers, etc., and another couple of people who had been in Canberra a week before. Nothing said.
No word. Wow, that is
no
terrible,
word, no tip off. And I think the thing that bites, and if we go back to that word pissed, I think what got people's noses out of joint was this would have had to have been in the works for at least a month.
Oh, mate, at least I reckon. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you go back through the parliamentary budget papers, there's the only there was a really great post from a migration agent. I want to say she's a partner at KPMG or EY or one of those big firms. She wrote a wonderful piece. I want to say her name's Rebecca Thompson, but please don't quote me on that. You wrote a really good piece about going back through the budget papers and looking at, yes, there was a viewpoint of revenue increasing from the from the visa program, but there was no mechanisms that were outlined or anything like that. And with such a large increase, one would, I don't know, maybe common sense would say that the government should have forecast that. So that's that's probably
actually, just as you're talking, mate, what occurs to me is, of course, government trying very hard to get these migration numbers down. This big response to, what was first a coalition line of attack and now One Nation. Government wants to be able to stand up in the public and saying, we are cutting back migration. But of course, they don't want to cut back the dollars that come through the visa system. So to some extent, I guess, just from a pure money point of view, you can see if they've cut the numbers. I think last time we were talking, it's about 10% overall off net migration. They got to make those dollars up somewhere. So, offset that with some big hikes.
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, the third point that I probably want to have a chat about is, and Ian Aird from English Australia made this point very strongly to his members and also in a quote that he gave me, and that was about, for the last, 2 years we're talking now, he's been banging on about, can we get a differentiated fee for the ELICOS sector? Because everyone's been talking about this 2,000 just killing the sector, which I think is accurate. The word that he has consistently received from Home Affairs is that they cannot differentiate the visa fees. So consistently, over the last 2 years, and then, bada bing, bada boom, overnight is a differentiated visa fee. So I think, again, when we talk about using that word, that word pissed, it's what's a natural reaction to something that you didn't see coming, you've been advocating for a very, very long time. And, if Ian is upset about that, which I suspect he should be, then, rightly so, because it's pretty poor form in my view.
Yeah, look, and the sector was very strong about coming out, and talking, I guess, attacking these kind of moves. Talk us through some of the discourse that's happened, because universities obviously very independent places. The whole sector has a whole diverse range of organisations and views, and not always necessarily aligned, but
well, that's exactly right. And
this felt pretty consistent.
It absolutely did, yeah. For the last 2 years, I think that's probably been from an advocacy point of view, one of the sector's weakest points is that we haven't been able to sing from the same hymn sheet. That each body has kind of we might have overlap on certain points, but certainly each body has absolutely gone at it from their own interest and their own perspective. And we saw a very different pitch to that this week, where I just obviously I get press releases, but I reached out to a number of people to see if they put something out or what the deal was, and remarkably, everybody was on the same page that this is bad, bad, bad. It's bad for students, it's bad for the sector, and it's bad for the economy. And ironically, that notion of the sector coming together and speaking with one voice has been picked up, not just in the Koala News, but in a number of the mainstreams and a number of different media outlets, globally, which has been interesting. Probably, I'll just quickly run through it. Everybody has the same message, but they've probably come at it from or amplified their own viewpoint in that space. So within that, we talk about, the IAA spoke out, and Phil was pretty adamant about expecting more from a Labor government or a Labor government, that really we should expect understands our interests better, which is a very valid point. Then Luke Shee from Universities Australia. So then Universities Australia acknowledged several positive announcements, but including concessions from Southeast Asia and mobility. However, it argued that these initiatives were insufficient to offset the fees, which is what they term a gradual erosion of one of Australia's largest export industries, and it's the most significant source of international influence. So I think that's probably a fair cop from Luke at Universities Australia. ATEC, obviously have probably gone at it from a worrying pattern of policy development, and that makes absolute sense. Felix from there used the term cash for students destination rather than a recognised education quality and integrity, which makes complete sense. Peter Hendy spoke about as I mentioned, the 252% in just over 2 years. He highlighted that one, and that's from IHEA. The Group of Eight, Vicky Thompson, warned that Australia is competing internationally for high-skilled people who may become future nurses, engineers, researchers, entrepreneurs, and technology specialists. From their perspective, every additional barrier just makes it easier for students to choose our competitor destination countries, such as Canada, the UK, Europe, Singapore, or emerging destinations, as we're seeing.
Can I just think? I think this point here is the absolute pertinent one. You and I have talked about this at length, but in doing this sort of thing, the government is undermining the future prosperity of Australia, because we know this country built on migration. Like modern Australia is built on migration. The best, the brightest, the most ambitious. These are the people that we need to build our future. And yet, government is actively undermining that future prosperity right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If we take a slight left turn, there's a really interesting YouTube video that I saw from a migration expert, and he was talking about the difference between short-term migration and the pressure that it may put on services or cost of living or those sorts of things versus long-term migration, and how Australia's ageing population is going to require a broadened tax base. All of those, I know, right? Who would have thought?
Dirk?
And he's compared Germany, in that scenario where, we're heading down a path of, an aging population. We're going to need more nurses. Who's going to be caring for our older generation if it's not going to be skilled migrants? So it's a bit of a conundrum at the moment. And like I said, I think the short-term money is always on elections and getting re-elected. So that's where we're at.
And isn't it like, to me, there must be some smart people sitting in Treasury, Department of Finance, who are looking at these kind of numbers and just are worried, right? They're the bean counters who are looking to the future and, looking 5 years out, 10 years out, and they can see what's happening. And no kidding, like you strip the effectiveness out of an incredible system like international education in Australia, this is literally going to hit the bottom line to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. And I've got to say, it's not by raising visa fees by a couple of $100 that they're going to recover all of that, is it?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's in my view, it's fairly short-sighted. Those may disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. But I think we've got an amazing industry that does a lot of good for this country, and it's being curtailed at the moment, which is unfortunate. Shall we continue? Because the Alec over at Run highlighted the practical consequences for many of the students already nearing graduation, and he spoke a little bit about skilled graduates into the workforce, etc., as we've just mentioned. So Run really concentrating on that workforce need. The new agent association, AESA, they spoke a little bit similarly to Vicky Thompson's point. As a student walks into an agent's office, how much harder is it for that agent to send them to Australia now? The proposition for other countries is so much better. And, that was the point that was highlighted by them. And then lastly, we have ARI from India, who's the agent association from India. They've got a really interesting point. And I'd love to know what you think about this one, Rob. They're actually talking about splitting the visa fee. So you pay a little bit up front for the application process, and then when it's granted, you actually complete the full payment. So it takes some of the risk, I think, out of applying for Australia, but back ends it with a guaranteed payment. Now, again, the bean counters that whichever consulting firm may have done the work for the government on this one may not necessarily think this is a great idea. But from a student point of view, where we're now talking about visas being more difficult or less objective to be able to obtain or to apply for, this seems like a really common sense approach. If you pay $1,000 up front or $500 up front as an application fee, and then you pay a visa fee when granted, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, look, I mean, the entrepreneur in me likes that, likes that approach of, reducing friction, increasing certainty. I just don't think that's the priority of government, isn't it? It's a big bureaucratic system, and they just want to make it work for themselves pretty much. The system's got to work for the system.
If we use the case of the Ellicott visa and the split visa fee and it not being able to be done, and now it is, maybe these things are able to be done, but they're just choosing not to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the visa situation in a nutshell. It was like I said, kind of came out of the blue. Some fairly hefty increases and some murkiness around the background of how and why and all the rest. So, but great to see the sector responding in a similar fashion, and it's good to see the sector. I don't want to say get their back up, but certainly push back a little bit publicly and talk about the negative consequences of these actions.
Yeah, and that probably dovetails nicely into the next bit of big announcement, which is, of course, the new overseas student commencements, the NOSC, new overseas student commencements. Those allocations have been released. So for those people who are new to that terminology, this is basically the system whereby the government decides how many places, particularly institutions and organisations, are going to get, and the new allocations have now been announced. Take us through this, Dirk.
Yeah, so again, it kind of came from nowhere. I think everyone was probably expecting it sometime over the next few weeks, but certainly was dropped. I got a little tip off that it was coming, so I was kind of sitting behind the computer going, refresh, and it came through. Look, the biggest, the headline is that the national planning level, which is all of those NOSCs combined into a total, is unchanged for 2027. So that remains at 295,000. Now, the question that I asked someone was, well, how does that relate to the NOM? And, they were like, oh, the NOM's separate and this. But I'm like, yeah, but if you're going to be reducing the NOM and...
So being net overseas migration.
Yeah. Being net overseas migration. If we're talking from a policy point of view about reducing that, and I would have assumed that the national planning level would have decreased commensurately with that NOM, but it hasn't. There seems to be a recognition that there are more people leaving. If we go back to previous discussions that we've had, well, that makes complete sense. And if you look at that NOM graph, there's that big bubble and it's coming down again. If you think a student, post-COVID came here, but if we talk about the first 2 years post-COVID, came here and studied a 2-year master's or a 3-year undergraduate degree, they'd be doing that. And then they'd have an additional, I think it's 48 months for their work visa. We're now at the point where we're going to be seeing more and more leavers for those who actually took on the graduate work visa. So again, I've seen pundits out there say, cross your fingers and get your head in the sand and just hope that it's all going to be all right. I don't think anyone's modelled this properly. Have we seen any modelling around, how many students came in those first 2 years? How many went transition onto a graduate visa? How many are actually due to leave the country? None of that, I think, has been done, or certainly been made public. So there was an acknowledgement by the Assistant Minister that people leaving the country seem to be increasing, and that was the rationale for leaving the national planning level at 295 for 2027. The second point around that is that no provider will be allocated a lower threshold than they have in 2026. So that's probably good news for people, and that all other exemptions continued unchanged, including ELICOS non-award and schools for those exemptions that were there. So, and then if we continue on, the Pacific exemption, articulation from an offshore
TNE,
enterprise, etc. All of those remain in place. The interesting one, which wasn't put in the release but was put in the fact sheet, is that TAFE will now be fully exempt from the national planning level. So, and that what didn't go into the main story because it wasn't released yet, but I did put a footnote on the story saying that we did anticipate that there were additional changes coming. As part of those additional changes, also, I don't know that it's even been announced publicly yet, but my understanding is that there was, and I'll just say there was discussion around a pool of NOSCs that could be utilised at the minister's discretion throughout the year. So be able to top up somewhere or be able to provide incentives for people, etc., etc. So,
reading between the lines reading between the lines, politicians like to have some flexibility to, hand out all kinds of gifts and nice things when they need to and want to and need to get some publicity. So I dare say that at some point we'll have a minister visiting a regional university and I want a bit of good publicity in the newspaper and they'll be announcing additional places.
Robert, you are so cynical. I don't know where it comes from.
Isn't it? This is unhealthy. I love unhealthy.
I love it.
It's got. Shall we move on? From big story to big story. Man, this is just bumper. I just can't believe how much is in here this week. This is so big because, of course, we've been going through. The Labor government started the university's accord process a number of years ago now. That's obviously now past Parliament. It's in implementation phase, and part of that was introducing the new Australian Tertiary Education Commission, ATEC. Now, ATEC, as we've discussed on the pod before, mostly has got more of a domestic focus, but there was this unusual thing where international education was kind of slipped into their remit in a very small way around these student allocations. Yeah. And interestingly, now, for the first time, it's been revealed, I think you could say, how
it's in black and white, Rob. In black and white.
It's in black. I can't believe it. Something in black and white. We've got something in black and white that explains how this is going to work. This is sorry, it's probably a very long-winded way to get to the point, but this is actually kind of relatively big structural news, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, the first point to make is that the Accord bill has been sent by the Senate to committee, so there's going to be a process around being able to talk about it further, and then it'll come back. But look, what the draft or what certainly was introduced to Parliament talks a little bit about the structure of how this is all going to work and all of those things. And as you said rightly, ATEC, I think with the exception of allocating these NOSC places and setting the national planning level, not setting the national planning level, the minister will do that in terms of the allocation process, is probably really the only main function it has to do with international, noting that there is no international commissioner on ATEC, but there are several other commissioners. So anyway, look, Tracy Harris did a great job at writing this up and being able to set this out in further black and white. So the first point is that the minister will determine the allocation pool. So the amendments establish a legislative framework that apply if the minister decides to set an overall number of international student commencements called an international allocation pool determination. So we might not be seeing a national planning level anymore. It might be more of an international allocation pool. Under the proposed amendments, the minister would determine the size of the pool and also set any additional matters ATEC must comply with when distributing places to higher education providers. And again, remember, this is higher education, not vet. These may include the kinds of ESOS registered higher education providers that may receive allocations and the matters ATEC must take into account when making them. So it sounds like there's going to be some sort of structure around this that ATEC will have to follow, which we'll be following, but that's the general principle. There'll be a parliamentary disallowance, so an international allocation pool determination and any variation to it would not be subject to parliamentary disallowance under the Legislation Act. This means the minister's determination of the allocation pool and associated allocation requirements could not be overturned through the ordinary parliamentary disallowance process. So I think that's pretty interesting as well. And look, it goes in line with what ESOS said, where the minister essentially has the determination of doing this now. So
yeah, it's basically centralising a lot of power into the minister's hands. And just as you were taking us through that, Dirk, you know what occurred to me? We've got a Labor government which has been typically, if you're looking left and right and black and white, then you'd typically say more pro higher education, more pro immigration and the like, broad statements. What happens next time that we end up with a Conservative government that doesn't like our elite institutions and wants to take a bit of bark off them and says,
yeah,
okay,
well, that's it.
Minister decides, chop, 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 I'm going to cut your...
The minister certainly has the power for it. And, that was part of the discussion when they were putting through the ESOS amendments was, who in their right mind would vote against this? Because once they get into power, they've got the tools at their disposal. And so it certainly is a sense of, it certainly puts a lot more power in the minister of the day's hands to form, shape and control what goes on in the sector and taking it away from a marketplace situation and, as the Labor government says, manage it. And so it will be centrally managed top down from the minister. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. The next point is allocating international student places. So under the proposed legislation, ATEC must allocate international student places to one or more ESOS registered higher education providers. The allocation must be made in writing and may specify whether a fixed number of places or a method for determining the number of places allocated to each provider, allowing for a formula-based approach rather than fixed allocations. So that, again, that's, a fairly interesting move, because if we do go to a formula-based approach, how does that formula get constructed then? Who inputs into that formula? What does that formula incentivize or decentivize at any point in time? And again,
you can see how sorry, mate. You know what occurs to me there, Dirk, just earlier in the episode, we were talking about how finally we kind of have this unified voice around some element of what's going on. You can just see that all fracturing to pieces when it comes to this sort of thing. If the new Tertiary Education Commission says, okay, we're going to make you a formula, every single one of those interest groups is just going to be there for themselves, fighting to get, and look, I don't, that's what they're there for. They're there to advocate for their member organisations. But as a sector, it's just one of those things that's helps, stops us as being as effective as we can be in terms of the advocacy that we do.
No, I agree, 100%.
Maybe that's a deliberate strategy in the way this has been constructed.
Rod, the cynicism is dripping off you today. Dripping off you. Just like the sweat in the south of France. The next point is past allocation performance. So when determining future allocations, ATEC would be required to consider a provider's previous performance against its allocation, including to the extent to which it exceeded or did not exceed an earlier allocation. This means the provider's allocation history would become a mandatory consideration when ATEC makes future allocation decisions. Again, this is really interesting. So past performance, right? What do those super ads say? Past performance is no indicator of future performance. It is here. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's a really interesting point. And then universities will be treated differently to independent providers. So different allocation arrangements apply to universities and other higher education providers. For Table A and Table B providers, the number of international student places allocated by ATEC becomes the provider's international student profile, a term that is not applied to other higher education providers, which instead receive an allocation. So again, really, really interesting determination there. Probably, not out of context. I think we've seen the government leaning into public sector organisations much more than what they have the private sector over the last little bit. Next point, allocations can be varied. Allocations may also be varied during the allocation period. Isn't this interesting? So your allocation can change. ATEC may vary an allocation on its own initiative or following the direction of the minister to consider doing so. Where the minister changes the international allocation pool determination or directs ATEC to reconsider an allocation, the Commission must comply with any new requirements specified by the minister when making that variation. So this literally
this sends me out the wall. When I read through this, I was just like, this is disgusting, because it's one thing to set the goalposts and say, okay, we're going to lower the bar, we're going to raise the bar, we're going to do whatever, but to give yourself then the right to move the goalposts whenever you want, for whatever reason you want, that's messed up, mate. That's un-Australian.
You would think, right? It's very control oriented. So, and again, the point, I think it was it Andrew Norton that made the point, how do you in a democracy, how do you criticize the minister knowing that the minister has the power to reduce your load, and how does that function? How is that function meant to work now? So it's a fascinating, mate. We're going into a new world, right? It's just the whole thing. Now, again, this is all sitting before a Senate committee, so this may change. So fingers crossed, if you're listening to this, I think submissions close I want to say the 30th of July. Double check that. You can see it through a Quality News story or go onto the parliamentary website. The Senate committee should be the Education Committee. But yeah, if you're interested, make sure you put in a submission, because that last point is probably a really interesting one. And then the last point that Tracy makes is that amendments to the ESOS Act will need to be further made. So it would need to be amended to support ATEC's new functions by allowing information collected under the Act to be shared with the Commission, its staff and contractors for the purposing of administering the ATEC legislation. So we might be seeing some more changes. If that is the case, and I have no reason to doubt Tracy whatsoever, she's much smarter in this space than what I am, just keep an eye on what the bill looks like, because I wouldn't be surprised if something else gets thrown in there as well. It's a good opportunity for the government to potentially throw something else in and make some more headway for themselves.
Yeah. Well, man, that's a lot to absorb, isn't it? We've been.
Yeah, it sure is.
It's just like being punched over and over. Maybe we should have put that in the introduction. Dear listeners, in today's episode, we're going to punch you in the guts. Then we're going to punch you in the head. Then we're going to chop you at the knees. Visa fee increases, NOSC allocations. Oh man.
Yeah. Anyway,
we have a job after this.
I feel like we're coming to the home stretch now. So,
home stretch. And we're getting towards good news, ladies and gentlemen. Good news is coming up, we promise.
Exactly. So this story came
down to Victoria
today. Yeah. So the Student Accommodation Council says that Victoria risks undermining student housing investment with proposed rental reforms. So again, proposed, so nothing's been made, nothing's gone through as yet, but certainly what the Student Accommodation Council has warned is that proposals to Victoria's Residential Tenancies Act, of all things, could unintentionally discourage investment in new student housing projects, potentially worsening accommodation shortages for both domestic and international students alike. So what's all this about? The proposed reforms would cap the amount renters are required to pay when ending a fixed term lease early.
Oh, interesting.
If you're leasing and you want out, you might, it might be 2 months rent that you owe if you break your lease, right? Now, if this applies to PBSAs or to student accommodation, there's probably needs to be a real rethink around all of this, because when you sign a lease with a student accommodation provider, generally they're either year-long or semester-long.
Yeah.
So they're, 22 weeks or whatever the double of that is, with the holidays included. So from that point of view, it makes lease breaking within that space much easier. Maybe that's a good thing for consumers. Certainly not a good thing for those people that might be looking at at being able to model what sort of money they get back on an investment into a student accommodation facility. So, look, it's a worthy point. Again, it's one of those things where I think the PBSA class of residential accommodation has long been asked to be treated differently, and it's always been grouped into other areas. And I've probably sat on both sides of the fence on that notion on different times. On this one, I think it's probably fair. It's to say if you sign a lease for your semester, then you got to honour it. Unless there's some sort of, obviously there's got to be a get out clause there that if you have to leave short because of a pertinent reason, then that's okay. But yeah, for the most part, if you can't just break a lease, move down the street, and the operator of the residential facility is then out significantly. So interesting.
I agree with you, mate. It's one of those areas, when you're trying to balance consumer protections with stability for business, because what is a lease in the end? Other than a contract, it's a contract, and so you sign a contract that is a commitment. So to me, there's this almost contradiction between having a lease that goes for 12 months and then limiting, one party's requirements under that. Doesn't necessarily make sense. Whilst I appreciate it being good for consumers. Yeah,
it's interesting, right? So these laws obviously get in a time where supply is short. So it's trying to protect that consumer. If they can find something cheaper somewhere, yes, they can get out of a more expensive lease. That's a good thing for the consumer. When a supply is abundant, this type of thing becomes a real issue, and it promotes house hopping or whatever else. And I'm not a property expert, so maybe we can get Dr. Adele Lassman on and she can talk about it. Lassberg, so she can talk about it. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I do see both angles, but I think on this one I'm absolutely with the property provider on this one.
Yeah. it's one of those issues. I'm happy that smarter people than me are sort of trying to tackle that because, just the moral side of both of that arguments. There's moral arguments on both sides of that, so it's very complicated to balance. But maybe just to wrap up, I really like the way you do these run sheets, Dirk. Like, let's wrap up on some good news, and the 2026 Keystone Awards have been announced.
Yeah, they have, mate. And I'm happy to say that I was actually a judge for these, and it's one of the things that I love doing is, it was fantastic. I do a couple of these a year, and I'll talk about the next one when they're out later in the year. But
Nice.
I love, they're not paid. It's all, it's all volunteer type stuff, and it generally takes, all in all, somewhere between a day and two's work of, reading through submissions and grading them and all the rest. But for me, it's a real shot in the arm for what's going on around the world. And there's some amazing things going on, projects, campaigns, initiatives that, different universities or different groups and different individuals, are doing around the world. And, it's probably, for the week that I do it, so obviously space it out over a bit of time, but for the week that I do it, it's a fascinating time. So congratulations to the Keystone Education Group for putting the awards together. Just quickly, shall read out the Higher Education Institution of the Year, sponsored by Keystone, is the Luxembourg School of Business. So congratulations to them. The Outstanding Education Marketing and Recruitment Campaign was Find Your Path at Waterloo, the award at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And for those of you that follow LinkedIn, you may have even seen a little video of me announcing that one, which was really nice to do. The Outstanding Student Experience Initiative or Project, sponsored by Beyond Abroad, was Think Big Development Program for the University of Bristol in the UK. And a highly commended was Hope for Rohingya, which is the Justice Parami University. Outstanding Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Initiative or Project, sponsored by Keystone, was Hack the Gap from RMIT Vietnam. So it's wonderful to see an offshore campus of an Australian university win an award there. And a highly commended went to Themed Parties at the University of Chester in the UK. Outstanding Teaching and Mentorship, sponsored by Keystone, went to Andy Radford from the University of Bristol, and a highly commended to Shalini Surindan from the University of Surrey. Training Provider of the Year, sponsored by Fine Courses, was the Croc Business. And so congratulations to all of those in the, provider categories. The winners of the student categories, Student of the Year, sponsored by findermasters.com, is Shiza Harani from the University of Regina in Canada. And highly commended was Yevhen Kawanovsky from Croc University. International Student of the Year, sponsored by educations.com, is Priscilla Yayari from Queen's University in Belfast. Research Student of the Year, sponsored by finderphd.com, was Lian Ming from Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, and highly commended from Raman Enwi from the University of Oxford. Student Athlete of the Year, sponsored by Keystone Sports, Lana Gamble from the University College Cork in Ireland. So congratulations to all of the student winners in those categories.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice.
We're done, mate.
That's an uplifting way to finish, right?
It is always good to celebrate some successes.
Absolutely.
No, Aussie. Oh, actually, RMIT Vietnam. Yeah, in the mix there. But otherwise, no, Aussie. Like, it's one of those things, so many different award schemes out there and things like that. All takes time to apply these things. So,
the Keystone Education Group is probably slowly moving into the ANZ. I think they've got a partnership with the University of Waikato in New Zealand at the moment, and I know that they're working on a number of initiatives in Australia. So they're becoming more and more recognised in this place. I suspect that next year there will be more interest in this, and with the promotion and discussion that even we're having now, people will be more aware of it. So hopefully there'll be more applications from Southern Hemisphere universities next year.
Yeah, excellent. Hey, mate, just thinking as we wrap up here, just want to give a shout out to Rishan Shekhar, who's just been appointed PVC International and Future Students at the ANU. Saw that on LinkedIn about a week ago. Just thought awesome appointment by the ANU. Obviously, ANU's had a bit of a bumpy period in the last sort of 6 to 9 months. And I just saw that and just went, that is such a good appointment. I just reckon Rishan is the right person to go in there at a time where things are shaken up, settle it down.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
So
good time of the year, mate. It's a good time of the year to be moving to Canberra too. Now,
middle of winter. Love it. I gotta Canberra is amazing in the winter. I mean, it's bloody cold, but when you get up, you got those crisp mornings. The fog burns off. That beautiful blue sky. It is just a bloody nice place.
I don't mind saying, I know that you know this, but I spent a couple of years at boarding school in Goulburn, and we played in the Canberra sporting competition. And I've never, ever been so cold as standing on the football field at St Edmunds College in Canberra, waiting for a scrum to pack and me being at first receiver and thinking whether that ball was going to break my fingers right off.
At least you didn't feel the hits when they came.
Exactly.
This message brought to you by Tourism Canberra. Love it.
All right,
mate. Well, look, thank you so much for keeping us up to date with all of the news. Once again, massive fortnight in Australian international education. So we're very lucky to have you keeping us all up to date. I'm just really honestly, if you were doing what you're doing, how would everyone stay up to date with this? It's not in the mainstream newspapers. Of course, the association puts out stuff from time to time, but honestly, the real-time updates are just essential. So if you aren't yet subscribed, ladies and gentlemen, thekoalanews.com, of course, and follow along on LinkedIn. Oh, mate, LinkedIn, 10,000. Congratulations.
Yes, thanks, mate. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it was pretty amazing. It's been like I said before, when I first started, when the koala kind of first started, this was the stretch, the kind of the big one. So absolutely thrilled, and happened on Friday night 2 Fridays ago in Sydney. I was out at a dinner, and we made it amazing. So amazing feeling to think that all the hard work has kind of paid off. And and again, I mean, without sounding silly, it's all completely organic too. There's no paid lists or there's none of that sort of stuff. So it's really good. So onwards and upwards, and looking forward to making some more announcements over the next few weeks, hopefully. So stay tuned.
Very much looking forward to it. So follow along, folks. We've gotten Dirk to 10,000 followers on LinkedIn. Next stop's 20, mate. That's what we're looking for next. No pressure.
No, none whatsoever.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks as always for the work you do.
Look forward to it. Enjoy your time in France, mate.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all of the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garrigal Land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.